got a little bit of old business to attend to first for those who want to see the inside of the Supro dual tone from last week. Removing the pickups involves loosening the outside pickup screws, which are captured with snap rings on the bottom, so they don't actually come out of the pickup. You need to turn them until they've unthreaded from the actual body. The pickup surrounds are screwed down under the pickup. It's a little laborious, but it works. Then I get to pass the pickup through the dainty little port routed in the guard. And we'll have a look at the electronics here. It's a fairly compact system. There appears to be actual remnants of black paint on the contact strip in several areas. Left over from the paint job previous, I guess, I don't know. The wiper plate is very loose on the axle, and it loses the signal if the guitar moves at all. This is an interesting vintage style switch in that it's got more contacts on it, and actually even space for additional contacts that weren't even included. This is 5 contacts, which is kind of atypical for something with only 2 pickups. I'm not sure I'm going to find one exactly like that that doesn't also have like 4 positions on the switch for like a 4-way Telecaster. So I'm just going to replace it with the standard Fender style, which is 4 contacts rather than 5, which means I will probably have to modify the system of jumpers a little bit. Shouldn't be difficult. It's a simple 2-volume, 2-tone setup, so there are plenty of diagrams to show me how. Here's a look at one of the pots. This is the one with the youngest date. 304 is the manufacturer's code for stack pull electronics, and it's from the 23rd week of 1961. There was another one on the harness from 1960. There were 2 different capacitor styles too. One was the film, like you see here, and the other was a ceramic disc. I think they're the same value. The sound of 60 cycle hum. And we'll get everything screwed back down. It really is kind of a bizarre system. Alright, best part of a job like this, getting to restring a Bigsby tailpiece 3 times. And everything's functional now. These pots were really sticky, dirty, grungy. They required a lot of contact cleaner inside, but also like the shafts felt, well, it was like moving through gravel or something. It was just, and they squeaked. They would. So I had to spend a lot of time pushing not only contact cleaner on the inside, but lubricant down the shaft of the pot itself. Now they all move freely. People get mad at me for discarding really old pots. Sometimes I can fix them, sometimes I can't. You know, it's a call. But these are functional. Pickups sound better. Most of the grounding buzz is gone. Of course, these are single coils. The bridge is just a little bit underpowered in comparison to the neck, just a little bit. Ordinarily, most people want it the other way around. They want a hotter bridge pickup than the neck, so if they're switching to a lead tone, depending on what your lead tone is. But, they're close enough to play. And, yeah, I kind of like this guitar in a lot of respects. I like the neck. Working on it, this attachment system is annoying. But inside, everything was, these are high quality components. It's supposed to be a budget guitar, but this has got some good quality stuff in it. Well, hey there, gang. Hope all is well in your world. Summer is definitely in full swing here, so bear with the sound of the dehumidifier, fans, and air conditioner. We're going to get groovy in a totally far-out Nordic kind of way. This is a Hagstrom from the mid-60s that someone seems to have sat upon. Here's the point where I should be inserting the deflating trombone sound effect. Yeah, that sucks. I don't think I've had a Hagstrom show up in a video before. It's been ages since I last worked on one. I guess that means that they're both rare in my area and pretty hard to break. The Hagstrom company was founded in 1925 in Sweden, and they were an accordion importer and distributor. In the 30s, they got into building their own at a facility in Älvdalen. I think it's difficult for a lot of us to appreciate just how popular the accordion was in the 1940s and 50s. People listened to that music unironically. In 1958, they decided to get into producing electric guitars. And this is notable because until that time, there was virtually nobody outside the US building them. There's a couple of Italian makers starting up around the same time, and Hofner in Germany. Besides that, it's a US game. So their designs are an interesting mix of Fender and Gibson elements and shapes, maybe a touch of Scandinavian style thrown into the mix as well. They also made instruments for export. The early Kent guitars were made in Sweden for a few years before they were switched over into Japanese production. David Bowie played one during the Ziggy Stardust years. There were also the Futurama guitars, which were marketed by Selmer in England in the early 60s, that were very obviously inspired by Fender, at a time when you couldn't buy a Strat if you lived in the UK. I mean, unless you knew someone who was going to America, it was just impossible to find them. George Harrison had a Futurama when he was in Hamburg, not one of the Hagstroms though. I think they had a number of different companies producing for them. They just put the Futurama label on anything that was a solid body. This is a Viking II. The Viking was first produced in 1965. It's a fully hollow, thin line design, not unlike the Fender Coronado. In 1967, they came out with this particular model, which is the deluxe version, also known as the Viking II. These are sort of an upgrade. They have bound F-holes, the gold hardware, and an ebony fingerboard. They're quite rare. Only about 1,000 of these were produced. Elvis played one in his '68 comeback special, which is a very distinctive looking cherry red guitar. I actually stopped the video the first time I saw it because I had to sort of look at it closely and figure out what is that thing. The total production for Viking 1's, the sort of working man's version, just over 9,000 between 65 and 72. And there are a number of different finishes and cosmetic changes, but the overall design was pretty consistent all the way through. Hagstrom players of note also include Frank Zappa, whose production company was actually contracted to do the advertising for these when they were released in the USA. Tim Armstrong, during the early years of Rancid, had some, and Pat Smear of the Germs, Nirvana, the Foos. He is a serious collector of Hagstrom solid bodies. They make a signature model for him now, actually. The company fell apart during the early 80s and then was sort of revived in the 2000s, and they're still going. But yeah, don't sit on your guitar, kids. Don't drape it across the arms of a chair and forget that it's there. This being a bolt-on neck probably helped a little bit. I'm surprised there wasn't more damage on the back here where the screws pulled through. But it is a bit of a mess in and around the neck pocket. There's going to be a bunch of gluing to do. And it's going to need some inlay in the veneer around here. Maybe we can try and touch it up a little bit. It's a bit of a shame because I've seen some other examples where the sunburst was quite dark and came up all the way around this area, the pocket, so it would be much easier to color match. But we'll do our best. Okay, so I need to take a second here to evaluate how bad is bad. There is a seam separation between the laminated plywood top and this solid neck block here, which runs through to here, and there is a crack that's vertical at this point, and it seems almost like this section has pulled down. Maybe it was stuck against the side of the neck or something, and the leverage took it this way. So that crack extends down to where the binding is, and I think it may be separated a little bit from the underside of the block. The front here seems to have remained glued. These two sections here have come up in relation to that surface there. There is material loss. The top layers of veneer are gone. Same story here. The top layer of veneer is separated, and then the top section of plywood is also separated from the block. On the back side, it looks remarkably okay. It's not bad at all. The finish is in reasonably good condition. There are a few cold checks here and there, and some areas that might actually be splits in the top layer of veneer. I still want to be careful with the tape on that surface though. So I'm going to heat that up with my hairdryer a little bit. Not getting it roasting hot, just a little bit to soften the adhesive a bit before I try to pull that off. Interesting pickups. Well, here's the point where I started to get a little bit suspicious that things might not be what they seem. The total thickness of the top material was there in some places, including the finish, missing in others, but at no point was it tall enough to match the surrounding arch of the top. It feels like it had been squished down onto the block, which is something very unlikely to happen in this area, between the end of the fingerboard and the front of the pickup. And even in a fingerboard with an overhang over the top, if that was driven down, it still wouldn't do this. And it's glued there. I feel like it might have been clamped down in someone's attempt at a repair. Turning to the other side, we see something else. There's a bunch of squeeze out. So that's definitive. Because the neck pocket was cut after the top was glued to the block, it would have been cut clean, right? So this whole area has been glued down by someone. Same thing with this corner that's slightly out of alignment. The back and side material are stuck in place to it in this configuration. And this poses a real problem in that disassembly would be almost impossible without taking apart the entire guitar, removing the binding and everything. That's not going to happen. I have to work with what's here and try to mitigate the effects. Like this front corner here is not in alignment with the block. So I have to somehow pull this way slightly back into alignment before I can glue these things together. The binding on this side, there's quite a discrepancy between it and the level of the side of the edge of the guitar. Same on this side to a lesser extent. The pocket with this break here is splayed open at the top quite a ways, leaving a big gap between the edges of the heel and the pocket. So I got in there with the palette knife to try and loosen the previous repair's glue so I could hopefully clamp things in better alignment. It's fiddly work, but luckily there were good spots to introduce the blade. The thing is, these three pieces have to move independently, otherwise I'll never get them all to align. Can't have two of them stuck together during the glue up because they're out of alignment. So another test clamping here, and I don't know if there is a way I'm going to get these two things to align properly in 3 dimensions. I don't think it's going to happen. I realized that having the crushed portions of the top glued to the block as they were was preventing the other sides from being able to move, so it has to be loosened as well. Yeah, there's a lot of this shattered wood holding things apart. In fact, I'm just going to remove that. Maybe we'll save it, maybe we won't. With all those interfering pieces, it'll close up in this direction now at least. Still don't think I'll be able to push this in. We'll see. I heated the area up for a while with my silicone heater pad and then tried to force the corner back up with heavy clamping. I then introduced some glue. Okay, I've just put a crazy amount of pressure on this clamp and forced this thing to within an inch of its life. Still not completely level in this corner. There's no way I can bring this corner up. It's just not going to sit that way ever again. So, you know, it is what it is. I'll probably end up having to pare away some of this surface and put a little filler on the top there, but, you know, there's only so much you can do. Part of the reason for all the dry runs with the clamping is to figure out the proper sequence. Like in this case, I'm only going to do these one at a time on either side. It'll help with the cleanup and just make sure that I, you know, focus my attention on one part after the other. And I'm using a lot of glue here. I don't care if it's sloppy on the inside in this case. I don't want a dry joint. The plywood tends to absorb more than solid wood. Especially this Luan, it's so open-grained. Okay, that guy goes there, but first I got to put this clamp on to try and pull the two halves together. I've got some cork on there as well, just to sort of distribute the force a bit more. Try and prevent dents. Second verse is same as the first. Okay, that's locked down as hard as it's ever going to be. There's still a void here, which I might fill with something. Need some measurements to work with in terms of the plug I'm going to make. It's about 75 millimeters down to about 60. I prepared a plug of solid face grain maple, and I'm scribing the surface of the top. The plug is tapered, so it should slide into place for a nice snug fit. I'll pare off the last remnants. Decided not to mess about and use epoxy putty to fill the voids in the plywood. This is a stiff plasticine-like epoxy that you need to activate, and it cures hard with some adhesive qualities, and it's a great gap filler. We'll get the plug glued in place. And clamped firmly. I'm going to polish the frets. Before I do that, well, all of these are slightly proud of the surface, the inlays I'm talking about. This one, however, is exceptionally high and is actually loose. So I'm going to glue that one down. And I'm going to use a little paste wax on there. In the areas I don't want glue to stick. Got a capo here that, when I put it across, still gives me some access to the edges of the inlay. I'll shoot in a little bit of super glue on the edges. I'll scrape off the excess glue and lightly sand the area. And polish the frets. Again, very low, very small frets. Tiny little guys. Once the patch is dried, I can level it off using a block plane and a scraper, some sanding. Then, using a flush trimming bit very carefully in my handheld router, I can flush trim the areas that were overhanging the pickup cavity and the neck pocket. I think that's sufficient. I'll apply a couple of coats of de-waxed shellac as a sealer. Okay, I've got my very rudimentary spray set up here. I'm going to try and hit this with some color from a rattle can, actually. I did a quick little test here on a scrap piece of maple. Came up with a color that is pretty darn close. This is neck amber nitrocellulose from Oxford. The guys I'm buying my rattle cans of lacquer from recently. And The chances of getting a perfect match, near impossible, but this should bring us close. See, I've got paper towels here. I'm trying not to get hard lines for the overspray, but it's bound to happen a little bit. I've masked off the pocket. I don't really mind if finish goes down into the pickup cavity here at all. And I've lightly sanded the couple of coats of shellac that I put on there so that this is ready. And I'm just going to do really light sprays, let it dry, because it's quite humid today. I don't want to trap a whole lot of moisture in with the lacquer, which could turn white. So this is just... and let that sit. After several coats of clear and a week's worth of drying time, I'll lightly sand back with some 1200 grit and then buff it to a high shine. I'll use some dark marker along the inside edge of the pocket. If I put a straight edge on the bridge and scope it out, the potential action here, but that's not good. Not good at all. So we're going to need a pretty big shim in the pocket. This neck is kind of crazy in that it's the same thickness all the way along down to like the 13th fret here. I'm sanding the taper into the shim. I actually had to laminate on a couple of extra pieces of veneer on top to get to the correct thickness. Way thicker than normal. Interesting adjustment features on this. Very slim nuts. And this bridge is adjustable, I think, in a couple of different axes. You can push the saddles back and forth, but I think they might also slide along this central spine here, so you can shift things laterally a little bit. It's kind of cool. That's interesting too, is the knobs seem to have like felt washers under them. Interesting feeling. They're not very... you wouldn't confuse them with a speed knob. It kind of slows down the action a little bit, but I guess it... I don't know why those are on there. Again, cool idea. Also a real pain in the butt. Yeah, so here's me flipping half of them around to try and get even close to approximate intonation. So it doesn't really matter how fancy and adjustable you make the saddles if the bridge base that they're attached to is in the wrong location. It's as if there was no thought given for string length compensation. So the theoretical scale length is right in the center of this bridge. In order to get things to play reasonably in tune, I've had to push them all as far back as I could possibly push them. Which means that the treble strings are okay, bass strings not so much, but it is what it is. And yeah, it's set up for 1960s Northern European rock and roll, man. 3-foot test, maybe. This is me grafting solid wood to chippy old plywood. There's some stuff along the edge here. I think that's better than it was, and certainly people won't be looking for it. I think it's fine.